Everyone, I'm excited for today's live because we're going to be talking Gothic horror, hidden histories, and women whose stories were never fully told. I'm going to be joined by Linda Hamilton, who is author of The Fourth Wife, a historic Gothic horror set in 1870s Utah that really explores polygamy, power, and what happens when a house and a system start to close in on you. If you love books like The Hacienda or like atmospheric feminist historical fiction, you are absolutely in the right place today. So let me just bring in Linda and we will start with some questions. But I'm so glad you're here. I am excited to talk about your novel. I read it and I have so many questions. So I'm
Wonderful.
glad you're here. So thank you for making the time. But first, for anyone who hasn't read the book or is meeting you for the first time, how do you usually describe and what's your elevator pitch for this book?
So, The Fourth Wife is a Gothic horror that takes place in 1882 Utah about a Mormon polygamous family living in a haunted house.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm already getting the chills thinking about the haunted house. I know that you come from a background in history and education and everything. When did writing kind of start for you? When did you start writing this book or in general becoming an author?
Well, so I always wanted to be an author since I was a little girl. So that was definitely a lifelong dream. And then I put that dream away in college for various reasons, but part of that was religious indoctrination and the belief that, the internal belief I had that a good Mormon woman couldn't have a career. And so I decided to start writing again, seriously, in at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020.
Gotcha.
That's when I wrote. So I actually wrote and queried two books before The Fourth Wife.
Oh,
And I yeah, I started with I'm just gonna write for myself. I just want to prove that I can finally do it. And then by the time I finished the first book, I was like, actually, I think I want someone else to read this.
I love that.
So yeah, so that's when I decided to actually pursue publishing full speed. And yeah, so third book was what got picked up.
Well, I'm glad it did. And let's just kind of dive right into The Fourth Wife. I was so intrigued to learn from your socials and even the author's note that this was inspired by your own family history. So what was it like uncovering the stories of women in your family?
So it was really interesting because it was disappointing. so so I was born and raised Mormon, and genealogy or family history is super big in Mormonism. You definitely knowing who your ancestors are, and the idea that your ancestors sacrificed and had all this faith, and you need to carry their name and their torch is a huge theme
Oh,
in
wow.
Mormonism and in my childhood. And so I have several polygamous ancestors. I would wager that the majority of Mormons who have been generational Mormons probably have polygamy somewhere in their line. And so when I originally wanted to write this book, I wanted to write it as a historical fiction. And I decided to do some research into my own polygamous ancestors to see if there was anything interesting there. And what I found was actually that there was nothing. It's sort of the opposite inspiration, if that makes sense. So basically, m- I was looking specifically at this one family. This my third time great grandfather by the name of George married a woman named Mary Resson, and then 2 years later he married her biological sister Sarah Resson,
Okay.
and they were all married to each other for years. And I was like, why is there no more information on this?
Right.
Here's this huge bombshell of a life and no one's talking about it. There's plenty of information about, George's work and he was an artist, he was a musician, he was very talented, very well known. Both wives actually wrote short autobiographies,
Oh.
but their autobiographies, neither of them even mentioned that they were married.
Oh.
They're more I would call them testimonies. They're more of talking about I joined the church and here's why I was faithful kind of thing. And what I discovered through research is that this was actually pretty normal. Mormon women frequently either censored themselves or were pressured to censor, to censor themselves in order to basically don't say anything bad about polygamy.
Mm.
Some, we do have journals of many Mormon women from the time period who did write very honest reflections on polygamy. However, my ancestors chose not to do that. And
Gotcha.
so the inspiration was like, well, what was this like? What was life like? Like, why would you not even mention that you were married to your sister's husband? Like, that just seems like such a huge thing.
It does
And
in today's society. Do you know what I mean? Like that would be, I'd be like red flag. Like
right,
that's
right.
something. Oh, oh yes.
uh,
That's so interesting.
Polygamy is something they gave their whole life to. They gave their identity to, their children, their family. Like, all of these things were sacrificed to polygamy, and yet they couldn't even mention it. And I personally think it's trauma, just straight up. Like, how do you talk about something that is so traumatic when you feel so much pressure that it needs to be positive? You just don't talk about it.
I mean, yeah, that's a coping mechanism, right? Is like we just
Right.
kind of stay quiet, and like women, even in the 1800s, again, staying quiet is like a survival technique. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
If you don't ruffle feathers or don't rock the boat, you can kind of keep going and pretend like everything is okay, which was interesting to see how all the wives interacted in this book because you get all those personalities. But I love the house because the house, for me, when I first started reading, I was like, something feels very, very wrong here. So, what kind of made you go from that research phase where you were, gaps in research with your family to making it a gothic horror kind of lens instead of just straight historical fiction?
That's a great question. And that was a huge part of the writing process. Was so obviously when I couldn't find really much information from my own ancestors, I, just started doing historical research. I am a historian by trade. I'm currently working on my master's degree. I did my undergrad in history. I
Huh.
used to teach history. So, like, history is my thing. I love
Mm.
history. So I had no problem like digging in, and I just very quickly discovered that it is very scary. The reality of polygamy. It was
Mhm.
a horror. And that's when I was like, yeah, this has to be a horror, because this is a horror. Like, this is a living nightmare, right? And so I love Gothics, and I felt very much like, this should be a Gothic. This should be a Gothic. And I think that the tropes of Gothic stories, including, like you said, the house, I just feel like they lend so perfectly to the story that I was trying to tell, and to the horrors, right? The classic Gothic, women running away from a haunted house is
Yes,
like it's polygamous women running away from a haunted house, right? Like, it just
exactly.
fits so perfectly, and I felt like it was really the right vehicle to tell the story that I wanted to tell.
That makes so much sense. The house really felt very alive to me, kind of like Manderley and Rebecca. Like that's what kept coming to my mind is like the house as a character almost. Does the house represent anything to you specifically? It just felt very much like that fifth, sixth character in this book for me.
I love books where the house is a character.
Yes.
So of course I was like, I need to do this too. Like, I want this. This is so fun to write. And the house being alive, I think there's a couple layers to it. Like, one is, in a very classic Gothic fashion, like when she initially sees this house, it is huge. This is Utah
Right.
territory. Like, this is a big, beautiful mansion. And then as she gets closer to it and like starts to actually go into it, she realizes like this house is falling apart. This house has really not been taken care of. The furniture doesn't even make sense. It's just all this random mix match things that
Right.
it looks like they picked up off the side of the road.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that represents a lot of what the real horrors of the story are.
Mm.
Because, there's a creepy house, there's a ghost, there's music, there's things that goes bump in the
Right.
night. But all of those just represent oppressive patriarchy, which is the real horror that's haunting all these women. And so, like patriarchy, like abusive marriages in general, like, on the outside, the veneer may look like, ooh, this is like a really big, cool thing. But when you look closer, you see that it is all, no, it's corrupt. It's all falling apart. And so Hazel's life, like, when she enters into this marriage, she has really high expectations of what's
Mhm.
going to happen in her life. And then very quickly realizing like none of these expectations are going to be met because of this oppressive patriarchal system that is engrossing her.
No, that makes so much sense. And I love how you blended, like, you talked about ghosts, like a supernatural type of horror with more of like a psychological horror where Hazel's starting to realize the situation she's actually in. How did you kind of balance writing both of those types of horror in like one book?
A lot of editing.
Gotcha.
That is, I have to say, is one of the hardest parts of writing, at least for me personally, is like you have the best way to describe it is like you have all these threads, right? You have like this story and this part of the story and
Right.
like this little thing, and then you have to like somehow hold on to every single one of those threads and make sure that they're woven in, at the right parts, and that you
Hmm.
don't lose the thread or that the thread doesn't suddenly change and not make sense anymore. Um, so that definitely took a lot of editing and a lot of just maturing as a writer, I think. And also it was, again, this is the way I felt that the story could best be told.
Hmm.
And so wanting to make sure that this book has, those classic tropes and that those classic tropes are reflecting the oppressive reality of these women.
That makes sense. What was like one of the hardest scenes or hardest parts of the book to write? I know you kind of said like balancing and like getting all those threads, but was there like one scene that you kept having to rewrite or like kind of go back to?
So the book in general went through a lot of revisions and a lot of, from myself and then from my agent and then from my editor, right? Like kind of a natural process, especially being a debut author. Like my next book, that I just turned in to my editor, I feel like from the get-go it was significantly better written just because I'm a
Gotcha.
better writer now that I've been
Right.
through that whole process, right? But the ending was hard. So the original ending of the book is very sad.
Oh.
Um and I don't I think just because it felt like a tragedy to me, I just felt like it had to have a sad ending.
Hmm.
And over the different drafts and like working with, through my own edits and then with my agent and stuff, like the ending changed significantly over the like 2 years that I had
Oh.
it in edits. And even at the end, so like, I had it with my agent had it, and we were about to go out on submission, which is where you send it to publishers basically and be like, who wants to buy this? Um, my agent and I were just like, there's just something not right about the end. There's just something that's not working in the ending. It wasn't like the overall ending, it was just like a small thing, and we could not figure it out. And so I my agent suggested I do this thing kind of similar to the threads where I go and I read the book from the perspective of each sister wife. So like
Oh.
I only read the chapters that each sister wife is in. So
Oh, that's
instead of reading it like, because the whole story is told from Hazel, the fourth wife's
right.
perspective. And so I went through and I just read all the scenes with the first wife and just read all the scenes with this, second wife. And the point was, first of all, to make sure that there wasn't anything happening where a character was like acting out of character, but also that like when I read through the first wife's story, I realized I'm like, okay, I figured it out now what the issue is. And
Ah.
I changed a little bit at the end, and my agent was like, oh, there we go. That was it. That was perfect. And so that's, I guess if anyone else out there is a writer, that is a tip. And it really helped me. But
Yeah.
yeah, the ending went through a lot of iterations, beta reader feedback. I don't know. It has a very classic, Gothic ending,
It does.
but I wanted to make sure that it was being very true to the Mormon story I was trying to tell and to these women and their specific experience in polygamy.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. No, the balance between the wives is, again, I keep saying it's so well done. So it's interesting to know that you kind of read it through each of their perspectives, which is probably why it's so balanced. But I do want to kind of talk about Hazel, the fourth wife, because she is just navigating a lot. She's caught, between that duty and that desire and just wants a different life, possibly, but then kind of is resigned to what she has to do. So, can you kind of talk about how that either reflects like your personal experience or just stories of the women that you've studied?
Absolutely. So for sure, Hazel has a lot of me in her. I feel like it just kind of naturally happens with any character I write. They get pieces of me, but Hazel especially got a lot of me because, at the same time I was writing this book, I'm also an active deconstruction. And so, the writing the book, deconstruction, like all these things are going really hand in hand for me. And so I'm on this journey in a lot of ways with Hazel because this book is ultimately about Hazel realizing that she has a voice and that she has desires and that these are acceptable for her to have. She doesn't have to give away all of her personal authority to a man and a religious leader, and that she can, form the life that she wants for herself. And so those are very strong, deconstruction themes for
Right.
religion. And so Hazel also has what we would now call like anxiety and panic attacks. And that is also informed by my own experience with anxiety growing up. And I think it's an important part of her character because it demonstrates, like Hazel in her time period and where she lives and everything, she believes that her panic attacks and her mental health issues are the devil
Right.
because that's like, her religious world.
Mm-hmm.
And she inherently, because of this, does not trust herself. She has thought, she has desires, and you see in just the first couple chapters her actively suppressing her own desires. Even
Yes.
like the simplest thing of like, I want to play music on my piano. Like
Yes.
you would like, I feel like most people today would be like, what is so sinful about wanting to play music on your piano? But like when you grow up in this high demand religion that tells you that everything, your natural desires are inherently sinful and that
Mm-hmm.
you have to always be, glorifying God and doing things for the good of the kingdom and all these things that she grows up with. Yeah, something as simple as wanting to play the piano can feel like a sin because it's
Mm-hmm.
not the optimal thing that she's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And so she starts with this very inherent, like, I can't trust myself. I don't know, like, how to, make these choices, what to do. She very much leans on obedience, which is something she's been taught her whole life. And then throughout the book, right, as she slowly starts to unravel things in her own life and in her own mind and seeing where, maybe she actually should trust herself.
Right.
And so my hope is that, and the reaction I've gotten from many readers is that is very relatable. Whether or not you have ever left a high demand religion,
Yes.
it's still very relatable. We all live in a patriarchy. We all live in a system that tells us as women that you are supposed to be one thing or this thing, or you can't say this, or you're not supposed to talk this way.
Right.
And so my hope is that this is continues to be very empowering for women and maybe to see a bit of themselves, that even if they aren't quite as like reserved and oppressed as Hazel is at the beginning, that there are still parts of you that you can free. And writing Hazel was in many ways cathartic and therapeutic to be able to like put into her a lot of these things and watch her go on this very unique journey
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like, I don't know, a sense of accomplishment in myself of like this, we are all on this journey together. Even, these characters are.
No, I love that thought. And it did feel like Hazel is very different from the other wives. So I didn't even realize that, like, I understood, that these women would all automatically kind of default to their husband. But I didn't realize that there was going to be a hierarchy in the wives, which was so like I was like, of course there would be, like, why would you would have to have that in a functional home? But do you see kind of the conflict more as like woman versus woman, or woman versus like system? Like, how did you write those? Because I could see both of them in the book, but how did you kind of write both of them?
So naturally in polygamy, so like all these little tidbits, like all the wives living together, the hierarchy, the idea that, the first wife is kind of in charge of everybody else. These are all real historical things that I pulled. Like a lot of the things, even some of the things that the wives say, some of the things they do, I took directly from the lives of real women. So like
Mm,
there is a lot of real history happening in this book. And what I see in polygamy is a system where on the ground you might like the system wants it to be woman versus woman, right? Because
Mhm.
if the issue is between you and your jealous sister wife, now the system can wash its hands, right?
Right.
Patriarchs, the patriarchy can be like, well, this is just women, like, being bitches, right? Like,
Right.
but because then the women around them are never going, the women who are upholding the system are never going to question that it is actually a systematic issue, right? Because
Yeah.
it's the same thing that happens all over the place with
Right.
capitalism in modern day patriarchy. Like if there's infighting with the lower groups, then the people in charge never, they don't get, their system never gets questioned.
Exactly.
And it's harder to break down. And so one of the things I wanted to make sure that there was, showing that these relationships between these wives were fraught at times, and there was tension, and there was a little bit of woman versus woman, but ultimately, and especially Hazel keeps saying, like, we have to work together if we're going to survive whatever terrible thing is happening in this house.
Hmm.
And so I think that ultimately, even though all of the wives make their own decisions about what their ultimate fate is going to be,
Right.
including one who decides she is not going to question the system and she is not going to leave it, I think that it's really important for these women to have, at least in some way, work together to get out of this abusive marriage.
Yes. And the abuse, it's interesting because when most people think of abuse, they think of people hitting other people, right? Like that physical abuse. But that is not what this is, which was very heartbreaking to read, but so realistic for me to kind of dive into that. How did you draw from like any personal experience or from any kind of like family history when you were writing about that sort of abuse in this domestic situation?
One of the things I have realized about Mormonism and patriarchal Mormonism is that it is an inherently abusive system, and that the majority of Mormon women would never would never admit or actually be able to realize that they are being abused. And so that was something that I was trying to reflect. Like, they are in an abusive marriage
Right.
for various reasons, specifically because of the husband they are married to, but also because this husband has been forged and enabled by a system that
Yeah.
says this is okay, and this
Hmm.
is and women, you can treat women this way. And so, like you said, I very much didn't want it to be like physically abusive, because then I feel like it's easy for readers to be like, oh, well, that was just this guy. He was just
Right.
he's the bad egg, right? You hear
Right.
this so many times in all sorts of oppressive systems, right? Like, oh, they're just the bad guy, but the rest of it is fine. But my hope is that readers will be able to kind of pull out and see that, like, actually, you don't have to be hit with fists in order to
Hmm.
be in an abusive system. And the manipulation that he does of his wives, and the way Hazel is basically forced to like fawn or follow him all the
Yes.
time in order to survive. This absolutely reflects even modern day Mormonism in my own personal experience that I've seen. This is an abusive system that puts women as lower class and does it in such a way that you wouldn't, on the surface, it doesn't look like that. But when you actually stop and think about it, you're like, oh my gosh, I have been fed my entire life on table scraps, on crumbs. They are giving me nothing.
Hmm.
And when you become brave enough to like call that out, a lot of women immediately come to defend the patriarchy. And
That's,
and they just uphold it because they're
yeah.
like, none of this is true, you're lying, or like, I've always felt equal. And one of my biggest pet peeves that I have is when I try to have conversations with women, or even I'm just posting, because I write a
Right.
lot about polygamy. I write a
Yes.
lot about women in Mormonism. Like, I have a
Hmm.
personal Substack where I cover a lot of these topics if you're ever interested in that.
Yeah.
um and I get so many reactions of people being like, well, I've always felt equal. I always have been
Oh,
valued. And I'm like, Do you not understand that being needed in a system in order to uphold it is not the same thing as being valued, and that equality is not a feeling? Equality is measurable. This is one of the hardest things that I feel it just in patriarchies across the board line. Like, we think about the United States Congress, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Significantly, there's a very small number of women representatives, and especially women of color
Right.
representatives. However, we know that, the women are naturally 50% of the population.
Right.
And so while some people may say, like, oh, but women, they can be congressmen now and they're equal, and look at all these women talking on my TikTok and all this stuff. But equality is measurable. If it was truly equal in proportion to our, what we would have significantly more women. We have significantly more people of color, right, in Congress.
Right.
And it works the same way in Mormonism. Men are the only ones allowed to have structural power and authority and hold structural, like, jobs, ecclesiastical jobs in the hierarchy. And everything has to be run and controlled by the men. Ultimately, at the end, they get all decision making power. Men get all the ability to say yes or no to everything. And so women may say, oh, but I have this nice job. My husband's so kind to me, all these things. But I'm like, in the end, though, Mormonism is not treating you as equal, because women will never, ever sit in the rooms where the decisions actually get made. They will never have an equal voice. Yes, maybe some men will listen to the women. They always tell me that, like, my bishop always listens to me. And I'm like, okay, but do you realize that that is a choice that he gets to make? You
Yes.
have no inherent authority or power. Sorry, I'm going on a rant, but
No,
yes.
no, no. I mean, it was so evident to me when you have that scene, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but when you have that scene when the husband leaves, do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? For that reason, he leaves, and then the women are left in this house, and they have very limited choices. And in my mind, I'm like, well, you could just do this, and then you go and explain through a character why they cannot just go get a job, or go, you know what I mean? Go to the grocery store, or whatever. And it very quickly dawned on me, oh, like, this is the situation that we are in my modern day. I'm like, of course, just go to the grocery store. Like, if we could problem solve. We're women. And even though they could problem solve the things that they thought they were allowed to do, it was just very striking to me. I was kind of blown away. I was like, oh wow, yeah. But I love that you're so passionate about it. I think we should be passionate about it. I love that you kind of touched on some of the pushback you were possibly getting from this community with the book, with kind of your stance on this. So thank you for sharing that. That was one of my questions. So I'm glad you just naturally approached it. But I do have some questions from my followers. They submitted some
Yes.
yesterday. But first, I want to do a quick lightning round to kind of shake it out and have some fun. So I'd love to know, what is your writing snack or drink of choice?
So Trader Joe's has those chocolate covered peanut butter pretzels. I will eat the entire bag. Those are my favorite.
No judgment. No judgment ever
Yeah.
with that. Amazing. Do you draft with music on or with silence?
I am I am weird. I am silent. I cannot write with music on because I get too distracted. I'm like, so I've always been so obsessed with music lyrics that I can't do it. But I do create playlists for each and every of my books. What I
Oh,
do is I basically pregame them. When I'm actively drafting, I am constantly listening to the in my car or whatever.
oh.
And so it's like I don't know, it helps me like get in the mindset or like living in this world, and then I can go write it. But no music when I write.
Gotcha. No, you're like immersing yourself right before you have to go. Right. That's amazing. Okay. So, haunted house, would you live in one? Yes or no?
I would live in a haunted house with a friendly ghost.
Okay.
I
Yeah, like
I
Casper.
I love old houses. Like, I love watching the TikToks of people who live with like a ghost, and they're like, yeah, it's just like our roommate. That's what I want. I don't
Yeah.
want a poltergeist. I don't want something that's going to stand over me in the night and like make me like not be able to sleep. But someone who likes to turn the lights on and off for me sounds great.
Yeah. Like Casper the Friendly Ghost. I'm for that. Okay. So I have three questions. One of them is, when you are writing a book like The Fourth Wife, Are you more of a planner or are you kind of like just write and let it take you wherever it goes?
I am a planner, but I'm not like a hardcore planner. I write
Gotcha.
a basically very minimal outline. It's basically just like this scene should happen, then this scene, then this scene, then this scene kind of thing. And I'm not married to it. I let the characters kind of go.
Hmm.
But as someone who just likes to, be appraised of what I'm doing next, it helps me to kind of just have like a list of scenes basically.
Gotcha. Okay, so this person said that she saw on Threads that you turned book two in to an editor. And so she wants to know, can you talk more about what book two is about? Is it another historical Gothic novel? Give us as much tea as you can.
Absolutely. I'm really excited because I can talk about it. So, my next book is not a gothic, but it is a very speculative historical fiction. I would categorize it as more witchy vibes, but you do have strong horror elements in it. Like there is kind of like a ghostly figure, there are some bloody scenes, nothing super scary, but definitely more like speculative. The book is called The Glass Looker.
Ooh.
So in the 1820s, there was a folk belief that there was buried treasure in the upper Northeast from like Spanish conquistadors and Indians and stuff, and that
Yeah.
this you could find these treasures and release them from the earth using specific magic prayer spells.
Okay.
And so my book takes place during that time period in a place called Palmyra, New York,
Okay.
which is where the foundation of Mormonism comes from. This book is
Oh.
about a woman named Sally Chase. She was a seer and she had a magic stone called a seer stone. She would put it in a hat. She would put her face in the hat, and then she would get visions from her stone.
Oh, wow.
And her sort of historical claim to fame is that she taught Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, how to use seer stones.
Oh.
And Joseph Smith then went on to use his magic seer stones and his treasure digging to find the Book of Mormon, to find the gold plates that then became the Book of Mormon.
Oh, how interesting. I
Uh,
had never heard of her. I know
yeah,
about the man, but I've never heard of her, which is interesting.
exactly. So this book is about the main theme of this book is what happens to women in history who disappear because a man did the same thing they did, because a man
Oh.
takes the credit for what they did.
Oh, I'm
Um,
already
and-
excited.
yeah.
Oh.
So this book is much more adventure because treasure digging. These people are running through the woods at night. All this
Yeah.
stuff. There is a romance. It's
Oh.
much more romance heavy. I love the romance in the book. But it is also very witchy because it is about this woman who's living sort of on the edges of society where she's not like a full-on rejected like witch, but also people are very skeptical of what she does with these magic stones and dowsing for water and like all of these things. And conflicts with Joseph Smith and his rival treasure business do come up. So there is like some religious Mormon history and, religious trauma kind of coming through in those things. But it's a very fun book. I really love Sally. She is such a badass and she
Oh.
is but I think that people will really enjoy this book because not only does it touch on this incredibly unique and weird time period, like who would have thought people were digging for treasure using magic stones in a hat?
That does
But
not sound real.
it's so weird, but so fascinating. But also you have a woman, we run into a lot of things about like women's menstrual blood and like the power of cycles and
Oh.
how that ties to her seership about, the questions of like being a traditional woman versus being someone who, is defying all of society's expectations. And I'm really looking forward to it and to people reading it. We should hopefully get a cover probably this summer,
Oh.
and it'll be really fun. I'll definitely be sharing more about that in the future, but I think if you like The Fourth Wife
Hmm.
and are willing to like go on another Mormon history journey with me, you will
Yeah.
you will enjoy it.
Amazing. We have one more question. You kind of already touched on it, but I'll still kind of ask it since it was submitted. Somebody wants to know, are you still connected to the Mormon Church and have you had any big pushback since publishing your book?
Great questions. So okay, so I want to be very clear that when I say this, I speak for myself because there's a lot of different Mormon experiences and people
Hmm.
have very big, strong feelings, obviously, about
Right.
this identity and things. So for me, I feel like I will always be Mormon in that this is what I was raised in. This is what I was steeped in. Like, I don't feel that I could go into myself and like pull out the Mormonism. Does that make sense?
It
Like, I
does.
just
It
feel like
completely does.
this is my heritage, this is my
Yeah.
culture, this is everything. Like, so many of my decisions in life, especially my really big ones, were all completely predicated on Mormonism. And so I will always be involved in in the community aspect of it, like in like, for instance, writing this book, writing, the writing that I do, talking about, issues in the church and like all of, feminist issues and all of these
Mhm.
things. I think I will always be involved in those in some way. I don't, but like, I'm not sitting in the pews on Sunday, for instance.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So, like my family, extended family is all still very much Mormon, and it's a very like clannish kind of religion. And
Mhm.
so naturally, like we might end up at baptisms or whatever, but
Right.
like we kind of do our own thing. And I'm a deconstructed Mormon who's trying to just be able to sit in nuanced spaces. I think one of the hardest things for me is that, or not one of the hardest things, but one of the biggest things for me, important things for me, is that like growing up in a high demand religion, you're very much taught that everything is black and white, right? It's wrong, it's right. You're with us or you're against us.
Right.
And deconstructing really kind of made me realize, like, actually, I don't have to be so black and white about everything. Like, I can, like, it's okay for me to sit in these nuanced spaces and work through things
Mhm.
and to actively call out harm and actively call out issues and not support, these different things, not subject my children to it, all of that, while still being like, I'm going to engage with talking about Mormonism because this is my heritage. This is where I come from. This is who I am. Does
Right.
that answer your question? Does that make
No,
sense?
it totally does. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable and like talking about it because religion is so personal. So thank you for just opening up and kind of sharing that. I appreciate it. But thank you so much for being here with us today. Such a very powerful fascination. Friends, if you love Gothic horror, feminist historical fiction, definitely check out The Fourth Wife and make sure to follow Linda, save this live, and send it to all of your book loving friends.